Alors, nous allons passer à la période de questions. La première question vient de M. James Bond. Alors, je vais lire la question textuellement. Does the borough, based on city and/or provincial forecast, find severe river flooding likely this year? In view of the restrictions associated with the pandemic, do we have a backup plan to deal with flooding?
Mr. Bond, thank you very much for your question. As a matter of fact, I mentioned clearly in my opening statement the interventions that we've put in place for this year in the eventuality that we have a flood. All indications are, as I mentioned to you, that the water levels are about 2 weeks ahead of schedule. However, there seems to be a stabilization. Regardless of this, as no permanent measures have been outlined by the different government levels, as this takes time, we will and will continue to apply temporary measures throughout our territory, as we did in 2019, and more if we have to protect our community. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, there's a series of elements that we've put in place, and we will continue to do this daily as we move forward.
Question suivante, Madame Martha Bond. Concerning item 40.0, draft bylaw -43 specifically, and any draft bylaw subject to public consultation or referendum, why does the Council not postpone their adoption until after restrictions to assembly related to the COVID-19 pandemic are lifted?
Thank you very much for your question, Mrs. Bond. The adoption of the notice of motion and first draft bylaw is somewhat a simple zoning change regarding 2 specific commercial uses related to car rental services and a car windshield replacement shop within the zone C4-280, which is on St. John's Boulevard. For this reason, Mrs. Bond, we consider that there is no use in delaying the adoption process of this file, wanting to avoid a future backlog in our files, of course, once we will have been brought back to normal in regards to public assemblies. In this matter relating to the Ministerial Decree number 2020-008, dated March 22nd, our legal services confirmed to us as of March 24th, the public consultation for zoning changes may not presently be held. This, however, does not apply to the adoption of notice of motion and adoption of draft bylaws. And this said, the adoption of the notice of motions and first draft bylaw for CA 29-0040-43, which is at tonight's council meeting, or for any other zoning changes requiring a public consultation, does not dismiss the necessity to maintain such a public consultation procedure required by our provincial loi sur l'aménagement et l'urbanisme. And moreover, the required due diligence of 60 days to process a zoning change request will ultimately be maintained, but because of the present sanitary urgency, this delay will be reinitialized, if you will, once the decree is lifted, specifically regarding sections 114 and 117 of this law.
Question suivante, Monsieur Maurice Mamone. Est-ce que vous avez l'intention d'installer le bâtard d'eau ainsi que des pompes afin de prévenir la montée des eaux pour les rues Neveu, Jacques Bizard et alentours?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Effectivement, comme on avait dit l'année dernière, suite à des inondations, on a trouvé la solution pour contrôler l'eau dans ce secteur. Et comme j'avais mentionné au début de ce conseil, on a commencé déjà avec l'installation des tuyaux rigides à Jacques Bizard pour l'éventuelle installation des pompes à cet endroit. Ceci étant dit, on n'est pas rendu à cette étape encore. Ça se peut qu'on va les installer bientôt, cette semaine ou la semaine prochaine, mais comme j'ai dit, on surveille les niveaux pour s'assurer qu'on ne les installe pas trop à l'avance si ce n'est pas nécessaire. Mais oui, effectivement, les tuyaux sont placés, les pompes vont venir et le bâtard d'eau va descendre dans la rivière pour fermer l'émissaire dans ce secteur.
Merci. Et la dernière question ce soir émane de M. M Levine. In January, Beau Pelouse, a West Island snow removal contractor, went bankrupt. He left behind over 5,000 unsecured creditors, homeowners. Such bankruptcies are not uncommon. On March 6, I sent an email to Mayor Bass and copied councillors Clément Talbot and Langevin. In my email, I mentioned that I have a way that would all but eliminate homeowners from being unsecured creditors as a result of snow removal contractors ever again. I arrived at the solution after discussing the situation with 3 lawyers, a CPA MBA, 3 snow removal contractors, a researcher, the spokesman of a provincial government department, and several others. The implementation of my solution would not only put an end to bankruptcies, but again, it will all but eliminate the situation where thousands of homeowners, Pierrefonds-Roxboro taxpayers, would become unsecured creditors. In order for me to solve the problem, I simply asked for the borough to pass a motion that calls on the agglomeration to defund Vélo Québec unless their 50,000 participants are all invited to raise funds for the charities of each cyclist choice. Here's the motion. There's a link to a website. Quebec is the worst province state for charitable giving in Canada, USA. Quebec is the worst province in Canada for volunteerism. Is this borough council interested in solving the existing unsecured creditor problem and at the same time increasing charitable giving and volunteerism in Quebec? If this borough council is not interested in solving the above problem, what rationale can it provide for not being interested in both?
Thank you, Mr. Levine, for your question. There's a lot of information there. I commend you for the work that you do regularly to try to raise awareness on some of these issues. It's a very complex question, and unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you regarding the creditors. But you've also mentioned Vélo Québec in your statement and in your question. And as you know, we heard recently that Vélo Québec has canceled the Tour de l'Île for this year. And I suspect that we have a lot of time that we can start discussing once we get through this pandemic and prioritize our actions in discussing some of these issues with all the stakeholders involved. And as far as your first comment regarding the creditors and the borough, how does that affect, or if we're interested, certainly there's a lot of information that's still required before we can take a position on this. And certainly there are probably other government levels that will have to be involved at that level too. So I welcome you to contact my office once we get through this pandemic. And it will end at some point, and we'll hopefully get back to some normalcy in our lives. And once that happens, Mr. Levine, I would be happy to meet with you in my office, and we can discuss not only these issues, but maybe some other issues you may have as well that you've brought forth in the past as well. Thank you.